Welcome, everyone. Good evening. I'm Blossom Matthews. I'm one of the two senior pastors here at First Methodist Carrollton. My husband, Nick, is also a pastor, and we also have our two associates here, Pastor Cindy Palmer and Pastor Chiv In. We always love having all of our people in the house. We just want to welcome you to First Methodist Carrollton, especially welcome those who are guests. We're so glad you joined us tonight. We're so glad you're here. We also want to welcome those joining us online. We are recording and live streaming, so whether you watch us live or come back for a replay, may you be blessed. And some of y'all may want to watch the replay, so let us know and we can make that available. We're really thankful to be able to share some wonderful content with our church and with our community and beyond. We do have snacks. Who likes snacks? Just in the center aisle, feel free to get up, move around as you need. Also, the restrooms are out in the foyer just to the left, so feel free to make use of those. Our session will last about an hour and 15 minutes. Can you do it, Bob? Hour and 15 minutes. And and we'll have Q&A at the end. And so if you are making use of nursery or childcare, that we will need to do pickup at 7:45. And so just watch your clock and feel free to slip out and go get your kiddos, and you're welcome to bring them back in here just in case the Q&A goes a little long. Depends on you guys how we do with that. And we're really excited to have Bob and Polly Hamp. Polly is at the back. We do have a book table. Who likes books? Let's say, who likes books by Bob and Polly? Yes, we do. And they blessed us by giving away 4 of their books. And so be sure to check out the resources back there. But who likes a free book? Okay, now we're talking. They're like, we like books. Yeah, we like free books. And so I'm going to start with Bob's, and I'm going to save Polly's for last because it's, I think, the closest to the heart. So that's why I'm saving that for last. And it starts with Think Differently, Live Differently. Bob is a wonderful writer who has been blessed to read his work. All right. And it's Think Differently, Live Differently, Keys to a Life of Freedom. And so tonight I want to see who can hustle. Who can hustle? Who wants this book? Hustle. All right. See? If the trades that you make out there are not my issue, okay? Next is Think Differently, Learn Differently. Communication with change in mind. And I'm going to say, can someone from this side hustle on up here? All right, if they run first, they get it first. We'll have another minute. Okay, and from this side, I'm looking for who jumps first, okay? Oh, okay. Well, after I say it. Okay, think differently, lead differently. Oh, Lindy beat you. Oh, I'm so sorry, but you were really good too. All right, Lindy, you will enjoy this. It's good, really good. And the last one, and I saved this one for last on purpose, is by Polly Hamp. It's called Cherished, and it's Shattered Innocence, Restored Hope. And Polly will share her story. This will be a blessing for you or for those you know. I call that hustle. All right. And so let me just ask, I know we have a number of Carrollton folks. How many came from Fort Worth? All right, Fort Worth. All right, can y'all welcome our Fort Worthers? What other regions do y'all hail from? Arlington, all right. Irving, all right. Where else? Allen, all right. Any others? Grapevine, all right. All right, we're Frisco, Plano. We're really glad y'all are here and to everyone joining online. And so we are thrilled. I also would want to mention next Wednesday night, April 9th, we'll have a deep dive on this content. And so tonight we're going to be listening. But if you want to dig in and talk about it, we'll have some discussion questions based on what Bob shares tonight. And we'll have an opportunity next week, and I'll be leading that just to go a little deeper and share about what we've learned. So we want to learn, and then we want to discuss it, and then you want to put it into practice, right? We always want to really process the things that we learn. And so we're thrilled to welcome our guest speaker, Bob Hamp, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist of over 30 years of experience. He's an author, speaker, and trainer who's passionate about helping individuals find their freedom through connecting with God and discovering their true identity. So would you give a big, warm welcome to Bob Hamp.
So thank you, Blossom, and thank you, First Methodist, and all you people who came from wherever you came from. I heard a lot of towns and areas around here, so thanks for being here on it's Wednesday night, right? Day after April Fool's, so everything I say will be true, as far as I know. But in the meantime, I'm really glad you guys came out, met some old friends and some new friends, and so good to see people from many, many lives ago. I guess I'm supposed to get on the stage, aren't I, Blossom? Yes, sir. Yeah, sorry. This feels like what I want to do, but because I think we're videoing, I know that we're videoing, so I think I need to be up here.
If you want to, you may.
I may. The camera person says I may? Yeah, all right, good. How about like halfway or something like that? Anyway, super grateful you guys are here. Blossom invited me a while back for a couple different options on a Wednesday night, and she wanted me like 2 months away, and I said April 2nd is the only night that I can do that on the one she offered. So she kindly moved a few people around, is what I understood. She's nodding vigorously, so she moved them vigorously. And so here we are, Wednesday, April 2nd. You'll see on the screen that our topic for tonight is understanding and responding to trauma. I heard, and you may or may not recognize this name, Mary DeMuth, who's a local author and literary agent. Mary is quoted as saying that trauma might well be the next mission field of the church. And I don't disagree with that at all, because I think the reason I put the subtitle, Hidden Pandemic, is I think that trauma is at the root of many more of the societal ills than we may necessarily think. And so I think it's important that not just the clinical folk understand something about trauma, but every one of us, and especially anyone who's in a helping position of any sort, at least start to wrap your mind around what are we talking about when we talk about trauma, and what can we at least maybe some first steps when we start to learn about it, but what else can we do both for ourselves if we recognize it in ourselves, which is one of the strange things when you talk about it. You might go, oh, wait, that's not someone else. That's not that person out there. It's me. But also, what can we do for others as we start to understand kind of this hidden pandemic of trauma? And so before we dig in too deep, let's start with a prayer. And I wonder why it is I feel like I'll fall off the step. I'm going to come up here and pray. So, Father, we are interested in whatever you're interested in. We love what you love, and what matters to you. We're growing our hearts to where it matters to us. And we know at the core that one of the things you love deeply is restoring the human soul. That you love to approach us in whatever condition we're in, and in your embrace, you love to restore us to the condition that you designed us for. So, Father, if we could be about that, if we could somehow learn from you about that and partner with you in that and receive from you the ability to do that, would you help us tonight to grow in all of those things and more? As always, Lord, we ask that you would open the eyes of our heart, give to us that spirit of wisdom and understanding so that we could see and know the power and the goodness, the kindness, and the beauty that you've put in us, in and through your Son, Jesus, in whose name we pray. Amen. Am I okay if I walk the stage a little bit? Okay. Just do this if I get somewhere I shouldn't be. I'll try to, but anyway. So, have you ever known somebody who does something and you look at it and go, that doesn't make any sense at all? In fact, what they're doing in the light of who they are and their position in life and who I've always known them to be, that seems like the most illogical thing that I could possibly imagine that person doing. Like, have you ever known somebody like that? You've seen them, it's like, I just always thought that's who they were, but they've done something that seems so illogical. Or worse yet, just think about this for a second. Have you ever done something? And you think, what on earth? That seems so incongruent with who I am. That's the most illogical thing I could consider myself to have done. You ever been that person? Not just known that person, but been that person? Not enough of you are really raising your hands because I feel like, okay, I thought maybe I was in the wrong place. But the idea is sometimes we think in terms of what leads people to do what they do, behave the way they behave, feel the way they feel, think the way that they think. And there's a particular way that we tend to approach that, and that is we think, what would make sense? What would be the logical thing? And then all of a sudden somebody takes a left turn and you find them doing something or thinking something or saying something. It's like, what are they thinking? And even worse, like I said, what if it's you and you go, what was I thinking? Well, here's what we need to understand. This is my first time to try this. This reminds me of a funny story, but here we go. I'll tell the funny story in just a minute. Remind me about this and I'll tell you the funny story. 3 kinds of logic. When we think about people doing something illogical, I think sometimes we have to understand there's at least 3 kinds of logic. And what I mean by that is we've got what I would call classical logic. You know, if I drop this, it falls. I guess that's physics, not logic, right? But, kind of 1 + 1 + 1 = 3, all the different things that just make sense in a logical sort of way. Or if this makes sense, you live long and prosper. There's this kind of logic that we know from, you guys know, right? Spock from Star Trek. There's kind of what we would call the classical logic that's just how things make sense. But there's 2 other kinds that I think everybody in this room should at least be thinking about. And then the second kind is this. What about, pushing the button, what about kingdom logic? See, the nature of reality is that we live in a world that's both material and immaterial. It's both visible and invisible. It's both solid and spiritual. And in that sense, in the material world, kind of the classical logic makes sense. But when we start thinking with a spiritual mind, one of the things we'll start to see is sometimes weakness actually equals strength. And sometimes poverty is wealth. And all these different things that in the material world may seem like opposites, in the kingdom, in the spiritual realm, they're actually a different kind of logic. And in fact, I would submit to you that many of the things people struggle with in their own journey of discipleship and transformation is we try to apply the first kind of logic to the second kind of living. So we're trying to apply material logic. This is how things should work. And all of a sudden God says, what if you just march around the building 7 times? You're like, that doesn't make any sense at all. But he says, yeah, but what if you did? And you march around the building 7 times and all of a sudden things change. And it's like, okay, not logical, but from a kingdom perspective, it's perfectly logical. When we start to see, God is not illogical. He's just not logical the way the material world thinks of it. Because there are issues of the human heart that have everything to do with where power resides and moves through people in the kingdom that's not necessarily have to do with the human mind and the human will, but rather the human heart. And this, in fact, has a different kind of logic than the human mind. And then there's a third kind of logic. And that third kind of logic, I guess I have to push the button twice. Maybe I'm just not doing it hard enough. The third kind of logic is the logic of the nervous system, and that's the main thing we're here to talk about tonight. If we're going to understand trauma with a really meaningful way of both getting what's going on, knowing something about it, having compassion for people who are suffering with it, recognizing it perhaps in our own being, and if we're going to know what to do about it, we have to understand that the nervous system has a logic all its own. In fact, earlier when I said, have you ever known somebody who did something illogical, or have you ever done that, I would submit to you most of the time we're behaving in ways that seem incongruent with who we really are. It has more to do with the nervous system and understanding it operates in ways we don't really expect. The strangest thing here is just a very quick example. Have you ever heard the old adage that a child of an alcoholic is very likely to marry another alcoholic? That's a little stereotypical, but have you ever heard that before? Like, that's not logical at all until we begin to understand the nervous system. Some of the behaviors that we become redundant about, some of the things that we try to change about ourselves and it gets worse instead of better, all those things that we struggle with. And it's one of the reasons why I say in our own transformation and discipleship journey, I think it's crucial to understand both kingdom logic and nervous system logic, because your nervous system is the way that you know who you are in the world. Your nervous system is your internal communication system that says to you, hey, what is it like to be you? And not just me, but you and you and you and you. And so the nervous system is that internal method of communicating, and it's the way that you experience you in the world that you live in day to day. Now I have to tell this story about this. Completely disconnected, though it may have some. Polly already knows what story I'm about to tell. Where'd you go, babe? Shit, behind, okay. You know what story I'm about to tell, right? So last year's funniest thing has nothing to do with tonight's talk, but I can't not tell this story. Last year, I had the opportunity to do a keynote at the Christian Counselors of Texas conference. And because I was going to use slides, which is not my norm, by the way, but I'm getting better at it. Because I was going to use slides, but I wanted to point at things, I bought a laser pointer. I was so excited. I played with it at the house. I made the dogs chase after it. Does this have one, by the way? Anyway, it doesn't matter. I shouldn't have it. I bought a laser pointer, and so day one comes along, and it's the first day I'm supposed to speak at, I think, 9 in the morning or something like that. And because I have a little bit of extra coffee that morning, and a little bit more extra coffee. And by the time it's time for my talk, I've got lots of energy. And I pull out my laser pointer, and I point it at the screen, and that dot's just everywhere. I couldn't hold that dot still to save my life. And so I couldn't even use my cool laser pointer because I couldn't hold it still on the screen. It was just everywhere. See, it has to do with the nervous system, right? At least we're somewhere on point here. It has to do with the nervous system. So the logic of the nervous system, let's start by doing this. Let's start by understanding, this is one of the funniest things. Every one of you got a brain when you were born. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. But you got a brain when you're born. But how many of you got a user's manual? Right? Nobody gives you a user's manual for this thing, and yet it is the main organ in your body that runs the show for you from birth through the moment that you're born again, and a lot of times well after we're born again if we don't understand what it means to be spirit controlled. And so the brain is the part that runs our body, yet we know so little about it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a brief primer and user's manual to your brain, and this will also apply to the brain of the person next to you. So husbands, wives, enjoy this. We actually teach this in a number of different settings, but I want to talk to you about the 4 levels of your brain. We'll go through this relatively quickly because I want to lay the foundations for understanding trauma. But so much of the foundations of understanding this is buried in the function of our brain and the function of our nervous system. And so when we talk about the 4 levels of the brain, what I want you to understand is we're going to work our way from the most primitive part of your brain to the most sophisticated part of your brain. And you can tell by the way I did my hand, I don't have a laser pointer, thank goodness, but we're going to work our way from the bottom of this diagram to the top. So the very bottom of that, by the way, I just want to give you a quick warning. I know that the PowerPoint is stunningly amazing and beautifully artistic. Don't be distracted by the artistry of my PowerPoint. Just let's work on the concepts, and you can just later tell me how great the PowerPoint is. That's a joke if you didn't know that. But we're going to work our way from the bottom of the brain all the way up to the top. And one of the reasons you'll notice, it's not a mistake that center line goes all the way out off the brain, because what I want you to understand is the big picture of your brain. We'll go from big picture down to a little bit smaller picture. The big picture of your brain is there's a top half and a bottom half. Each half will divide into halves as well. But what I want you to start with today is the bottom half of your brain is designed to keep you not dead. And as long as the bottom half of your brain is working correctly, then you are not dead tonight. So I feel good that most of the bottom half of your brain is working. I had a 14-year-old kid in my office one day. We were going through this together, and he said, "Why do you say not dead instead of keep us alive?" I said, "Because it doesn't really make us fully alive. It just keeps us not dead." The bottom half of your brain is all about survival, but it's not about who you are. It may preserve who you are, but it will badly inform you about who you are. In fact, if you're living from the bottom half of your brain, and many of us are, it's part of the conversation tonight, if we're living from the bottom half of our brain, you have a picture of yourself that's not an accurate picture of your created design. When we live out of survival, we live out of almost dead, but not dead. Until we learn to get past that midway part of our brain, we can't live fully alive when we live only from the bottom half. So the bottom half of your brain is designed to keep you not dead. The top half of your brain, you're going to discover in the next couple minutes, the top half of your brain is where the abundant life that we've been created for and promised takes place when we learn how to navigate out of the bottom and into the top part of your brain. And I'm actually going to make that relatively practicable tonight. Even though we're speaking mostly kind of anatomy and neuroscience, I want to give you guys something to do because Polly, who's back at the book table, she's my wife, she and I both work with people in a number of different circumstances, and we would say that probably 80 to 90% of the people that we work with are living out of the survival part of their brain 95 to 100% of the time. And if that translates at all, that means most of us here in the room tonight are likely to spend a significant amount of our time operating out of that bottom half of our brain. Wouldn't it be lovely to know how to get out of that and start to live fully alive? Well, user's manual to your brain, here we go. We've got two places, by the way, two resources where this teaching is available. One of them is in Polly's book, Cherish, that was given to, who got Polly's book? Where was it? Right here? You hustled up here to get Polly's book. The teaching on the brain is in her book, but it's also in, don't you have it in Tada also, babe? This teaching on the brain is also available in Tada. We'll talk a little bit about Tada perhaps a little bit later. But both of those books on the table have what I'm about to teach you about your brain. And so what we do is start with this. Put your hand right here in the back of your, kind of right at the base of your skull, top of your neck, and recognize that you are now holding your brainstem. Your brainstem, that's what that says. Your brainstem is the most primitive part of your brain. Some people would call that your reptile brain. You can take your hand off unless it just feels good to do that. Rub a little bit. It'll help you get out of the bottom half. But some people call it the reptile brain because it's so driven by instinct and survival. It doesn't think, it doesn't solve problems. Listen carefully. It doesn't have relationships except with fear and anger. It doesn't have relationships with people because that's not the part of your brain that's designed for that. In fact, Polly, who is a trained lifeguard, would tell you that if you're drowning, you might actually kill the person you love the most if they try to save you because your brainstem has taken over and it's put you in a state that we'll call fight, flight, freeze. And if someone comes up to you and you can get one more breath by holding them underwater, your brainstem will get you to do that. You ever wonder why sometimes you hurt the people you love the most? It may well be, or maybe that you wonder why people that you love hurt you. It may well be that the brainstem is running most of their life because when they're in that kind of survival mode, in that primitive reptile brain, whatever they feel like they need to do to get one more breath, either literally or metaphorically, they will reach out and hurt someone else just for their own survival. It's not personal, even when it feels like it. It is the instinct of somebody whose brain is telling them they're dying. So the brainstem, when it gets triggered, the brainstem releases something. I'm trying to time this really well and obviously not doing that. The brainstem, hello, push. I'm going to talk to you about it before I come up on the screen. The brainstem responds to a threat. And so when I say it's about survival, the brainstem is scanning the horizon for threat. And when it experiences threat of any kind, it releases two chemicals into your system. It releases, hang on, my mind just went blank. How does it do that? It's because my brainstem is, so it releases cortisol and adrenaline into your body. And see why it's right down there at the bottom? Because it shoots into your body this cortisol, adrenaline, and you feel kind of this rush of energy. The reason it does that, let's see if it works this time. The reason it does that is so that you can, thank you very much. I think she's doing that in the back, not me, but it works either way. It works to protect you from a threat, and it releases, see, that's why I forgot because it was on the screen. It does that because it puts you in a state that we'll call fight, flight, freeze. That's getting you ready to survive a threat, whether you can get the energy you need to get in a fight and protect yourself, get the energy you need to run away and escape, or get the energy you need to kind of freeze and make sure that the bear goes by and doesn't see you. Whatever it is, that adrenaline, cortisol courses through your system. It is designed to last about 20 to 30 minutes and then let down and you go back to normal life. That's the design of the brainstem. It's the design of adrenaline and cortisol. And by the way, like if you're an antelope or if you're a tortoise or if you're a porcupine or whatever kind of creature you might be and you've experienced a threat, your brainstem would do the same thing. But about 20 to 30 minutes in, your brainstem will go, okay, all is well. You can go back as you were and the rest of your brain takes back over and the brainstem lets go. In the human condition, we're so smart. We're so smart, we can keep our brainstem engaged for our entire life. Now, the we're so smart is kind of a joke, but what I'm telling you is when you live under constant stress and your life is filled with stress, you'll actually turn on your brainstem and it can be releasing adrenaline, cortisol into your body all day long. It's a little bit like taking the accelerator on your car, putting it on the floor and leaving the car in neutral where the engine just races. Your body and your organs and your nervous system is being overdriven, and it's no wonder we have such a pandemic of anxiety in the world we live in, because the stress that people are under, and in many cases stay under, is an emotional threat, because the brain doesn't know the difference between a physical threat, guy with a gun, and an emotional threat. Oh no, they're going to reject me. The brain does exactly the same thing in both of those cases. And so if you're afraid the boss will fire you, afraid you're going to go bankrupt, afraid you can't pay your next bills, afraid of the next president, afraid of the last president, if you're afraid of those things, your brainstem is churning 100 miles an hour, and therefore so is your body. And it will wear your organs out, it'll wear your flesh out, it'll wear your thoughts out, and we find ourselves in that state of chronic stress because all we're doing is managing to stay not dead, but we're far, far, far from being fully alive. Thank you guys for making all those things come up on the screen. At least I don't think I did that. But how do you get out of your brainstem? It's important to understand, once we're dealing with these kind of primitive, instinctive drives, the body talks to the brain just as much as the brain talks to the body. It's a circular relationship between our brain and our body. As you'll see in a couple minutes, the nervous system fills every part of our body, and the signal sent back to the brain and the signal from all the things going on in your body, once you're in stress, the body says, I'm in stress, and the brain says, oh no, another threat. And it just kind of keeps that going. So here's why that matters, because what the brainstem needs to know is, you're not dying. You're not dying. Let me assure you guys for just a minute, this is a super safe place, and not just because you can tell your personal stuff, but I just feel like this is a safe place. You're not dying. Take a deep breath, everybody. Take another one. A really deep breath. Hold it. See, here's what's happening. The oxygen that you're taking in is starting to fill your bloodstream. And as it fills your bloodstream, it's going back up to the brainstem and it's saying, she's not dying. And the brain is going, oh, she's not dying? The body says, no, she's not. And the brain says, oh, okay. And it switches off. The quickest way out of your brainstem is a little bit of self-talk that says, I'm safe, and a little bit of oxygen that says, see, even the body says I'm safe. And so if you live a life of chronic stress, it's incredibly important that you take the time multiple times throughout your day to go, isn't it interesting that we see in both Old and New Testament that the word for spirit is often the same word used for breath? So when we stop and breathe, we're letting ourselves come alive again. But when we're in our brainstem, we're simply not dead. Once we start to breathe and once we start to really assure ourselves and begin to rest in that assurance that we're not dead or not dying, now we can get up to the next bottom half of our brain, which we will call the midbrain. Make me believe that me pushing that button did that. Thumbs up from the booth. Love that. The midbrain has a much longer name than that, so I shortened it to midbrain. And right now, this moment, I can't even think of it because I've called it midbrain for so long. The midbrain has a different function to keep you not dead, but it's still very much working to keep you not dead. What it does, you can't see me push the button unless I do this, right? That's really her doing that, but it makes me feel powerful to do that. So, it is me? I did that. The way the midbrain keeps you not dead is it assures that you will eat dinner, drink your water, not your food dyes, just your water. Drink your water, sleep when you need to. As Polly likes to say, go potty when you need to. The midbrain is going to be sure that you fulfill all the physical appetites of your body. You realize that those appetites exist to keep you not dead. I know there's a lot more fun things to do with food than just not dead, but it's basically there to keep you not dead. And so the midbrain is the part of your brain that says, hey, don't you need some protein? Here's the big one. Hey, don't you need some spinach? because there's iron and vitamins, and the brainstem says, no, not spinach. And here's the thing, the midbrain will eventually tell you no to spinach because the midbrain is very programmable. We come into the world with a nervous system that says, here's what you need, and over a lifetime, the midbrain starts to go, yeah, but here's what I want. So it can go from spinach to cupcakes. It can go from kale to Oreos, and it only takes a couple years to get there. It's getting back that's a lot harder. To move from cupcakes to spinach is a lot harder to get back to. Have you noticed? So the midbrain functions by making sure that it offers you a reward. This is a very important idea, so make sure you catch this. It offers you a reward for doing what the midbrain wants you to do. Your midbrain trains you just the same. How many of you have dogs? Right? Did you train your own dog, or did you get someone to do it for you? And then I would ask the question, did it work, or are you just kind of living with the consequences, right? Because whatever you train a dog to do, it'll do. And whatever your midbrain trains you to do, until you raise to a higher level of thought, your midbrain will be the part of you that runs the show most of the time. And the reason for that is because it dangles in front of you this amazing reward called dopamine, to which I always want to go, why do you think they call it dope? How many of you guys remember? Is it just me? It's an old commercial. Why do they see nobody except Leah laughing? So, dopamine is the second most amazing chemical that we can have coursing through our body because its function is it's a pleasure producer and painkiller at the same time. How many of you guys, this is not product placement here, but get a Starbucks somewhere in your day. You've kind of been waiting for it, right? And on the cup it says, that first sip feeling. You know what I'm talking about? You take that first sip and you go, oh, that is dopamine. One sip of caffeine is not enough to make you go, ah, but when you take that first sip, the brain goes, that's what I wanted you to do. Here's your reward, dopamine. The relief that we feel when dopamine flows is one of the main reasons why addicts struggle so much to get free from their addictions. Because dopamine, it's not so much, though a number of different drugs that people get addicted to, or foods that we get addicted to, like sugar and certain carbs and different things, the number of substances we get addicted to have their own addictive capacity. But really, it's that reward that the brain gives you when you go, okay, I'll do it. I didn't want to eat the whole box of Oreos, but I did. And the brain flushes your system with dopamine, and you feel so much pleasure and pain relief at the same time, you almost can't help but go, ah. And if it was a box of Oreos, then you go, ugh. But whatever it is, the first thing is relief, and it's one of the main reasons that we do things we don't want to do because the brain is offering you rewards through this thing called dopamine. Now, I want to tell you something about dopamine that's very important, and I don't think I'm going to dive into the second piece of this because I want to make sure we get to the trauma piece. But one of the things, it's important to understand dopamine because dopamine has a much more attractive sister called oxytocin that we're going to get to at the next level. And they have the same chemical effect, but their shelf life in your body is very different. And because of that, dopamine is the root of addiction because what it does is this. The is like this peak that comes like this. And you peak for about 10 minutes, and then you go, and the thing about the crash is that it's a little bit further down than where you started. So you start here, you peak, and you crash down here. What that means is to get back up here, you need a little bit more than what you had the first time. And then the crash is even further down. And so to get back up here, you need a little bit more. And then the crash is even further down. So dopamine becomes a lot like a roller coaster that's taking you on a ride that's like, it's just kind of whipping you around. And you will do a number of illogical things if you let dopamine become your master. It feels like a good master, but only for 10 minutes. And then you shake your fist at it and you want more of it, but you don't want to do the thing that got you more of it. And yet you crave the relief. Many people don't know this, but people who struggle with addiction don't engage in their substance, behavior, or relational pattern for the good feeling that comes from it. They engage in their addiction because they finally feel normal again. The struggle for the addict isn't, I want to be high. The struggle for the addict is, I feel so low. Just to feel normal, I need to feed myself some dopamine. And my brain tells me my heroin, my porn, my Oreos, in case you hadn't noticed, whatever it is your brain tells you. And when you do what your brain tells you, it says, here's the reward. But tomorrow you'll need more. And here's the reward. And tomorrow you'll need even more. And so you end up on this roller coaster ride that feels like, to be myself, I always have to have a little bit more. How many of you guys have detoxed from sugar? How many of you detoxed from caffeine? How many of you did both at the same time? I've done it once. I will never, ever do both at the same time again, because that detox is real, and you start craving not only for the relief of the headache, but also for I feel not like myself. I just need to feel like myself. The midbrain and the brainstem will keep you not dead, but it also potentially could prevent you from feeling fully alive if you let the bottom half of your brain be your master and the top half becomes the servant. Let's see if we're going to move up to I'm going to tell you how to get out of the midbrain, but to do that, I need to take you to the next level and teach you about it. Lauren, there we go. Next level, thank you, Lauren. The next level is called the limbic system. And if you picture a brain, and you know how the top of the brain looks like a helmet, just sitting underneath that, if you do this, just sitting underneath that is a whole bunch of little parts of the brain that come together to form this thing called the limbic system. And the limbic system is the center of, or the producer of what we call connection. It fosters connection, and what connection does, and here's the beauty of this, what connection does is it releases this this hormone called oxytocin. Exact same physiological effect as dopamine, except, here's the beauty of it, and I'm going to submit to you that this is the design for the way we were supposed to live, instead of the roller coaster of dopamine. Oxytocin does this. When you make a connection, and I'm going to talk about the connections we need to make in a couple minutes, when you begin to legitimately connect, those connections produce oxytocin, but the beauty of oxytocin is it also then produces connection. So instead of a roller coaster like dopamine, oxytocin is kind of a steady climb up the ski lift, and then you get to the top of the mountain, and you can just kind of cruise across the mountain like this all day long. Yes, I see there's a hole in the stage there, but you can cruise with oxytocin all day long, and it'll kind of bring you gently down at nighttime, and if you wake up the next day and make all the same connections, you can live with the painkiller, pleasure-producing oxytocin as a constant flow. One of the most important connections that we need to make is, of course, to our Creator. But here's the dilemma. That's not the first connection we need to make. It's just the most important one. And in that sense, the first one might also be more important in this sense. If you are not connected to yourself, you cannot connect to anyone or anything else. So when we talk about connection, what we're talking about is awareness. We can live so in our brainstem, we can live so unconscious, we can live so going through kind of the unconscious program. We're completely disconnected from ourselves, and if I'm disconnected from me, I can't connect to God, I can't connect to my wife, I can't connect to anybody if I'm disconnected from me. If that causes you a little bit of a struggle, let me describe it this way. If this piano, I'm not going to touch it, it's not mine, but if I were to cut this cord right here, the cord is still plugged into power, but the piano can't connect to the power because it's disconnected from itself. In the same way, when I'm disconnected from me, I can pray, but I'm still disconnected. When I'm disconnected from me, I can commune with my Creator. I can commune with my wife. I can hang with my friends, and I'm still not connecting to them because I'm disconnected from me. Again, what does it mean to be connected to self? I'm aware, I'm paying attention to what's happening in here and in here and in here. And the brain and the nervous system are part of how we do that. And so when we're living with trauma, which we'll get to in a couple minutes, when we're living with that, we can live disconnected, and we try to connect to God, but we're disconnected from ourselves. And we start to get angry at God or frustrated at God or disbelieve in Him because we're not receiving the benefit of the connection. Not because He's not willing to connect, but we ourselves are already disconnected. So that connection to self, connection to Creator, and then our capacity to connect to other safe people in our life is the faucet of oxytocin that allows us to live kind of that ski lift mountaintop that's a gentle mountaintop, kind of not a dopamine high, but rather a gentle mountaintop where we stay in that pleasure-producing, pain-killing state all day, And at night, we come down enough to rest, but we wake up the next day, we connect to self, we connect to our Creator, and we're back into our limbic system instead of the bottom half of our brain. The way out of the midbrain is to learn and practice connection. Let me say it again. The way out of the midbrain is to learn and practice genuine connection. Let me tell a story. I just realized I got to go a lot faster. You guys listen super fast, okay? I was sitting with a family, mother, father, son. They'd come from another state to talk to me. Their 15-year-old son, had been looking at pornography. They found it on his computer. The mom and dad were very involved. The son was loved his parents very much, and they came in to talk about it. And as they're talking about it, I'm noticing the strangest thing. All of them are kind of living from their mind. None of them seem like to be living from their personhood. You know what I'm talking about? They're all, I could say it this way, they're all living from their midbrain. And there seems to be no like real emotion in the room. It's just kind of logic. And by that I mean the classical logic. And I'm watching them, and I thought to myself, what I described to them is I said, listen, it may well be that your son is looking at pornography on his computer, but so much of the time, porn is just a symptom of something else. What I suspect is your son is really hungering for genuine connection, and the porn has become a counterfeit for that. And so if you guys can learn how to foster connection in your relationship, they're like, what does that mean? Like they literally all looked at me and said, what does that mean? Mother, father, son, what is this connection thing of which you speak? And so I put the father and the son face to face, which very intentional. Put the father and the son face to face, and I said, what I want you guys to do is just make eye contact and don't look away. And as they made eye contact, I said, I'm going to talk to you for a couple minutes, but you guys keep looking at each other. And I said, connection is the natural response to the human soul when we stop fighting to be disconnected. We are created for connection. We're bred, born, and developed for connection. And yet sometimes our very soul fights against the thing we need the most to get up into the upper part of our brain. Why is that? And I'm going to quickly answer, because of Genesis 3 and the shame that Adam and Eve felt. Shame is, as Brene Brown says, the fear of disconnection, which I always say the fear of disconnection that leads to disconnection. The shame of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the way that we tend to fear our own personhood, we tend to fear connection, because if we get connected, we'll actually get to know ourselves. And so we tend to have these barriers. All of us have slightly different ones, but we tend to have these barriers. Got this father and son to look at each other, and I said, just stop fighting for a minute. Just relax and look at your dad, look at your son. And as they looked at each other for a couple minutes, you saw the dad's face soften. And when the dad's face softened, the son had a little tear show up in his eye. Connection is the natural state of human relationships when we stop fighting against the thing that we need. So connection to self, connection to our Creator, connection to safe people in our lives, that's the way out of the midbrain, and it's the way of the limbic system. Now, there's one more step up. I guess we're just talking about the brain tonight, Blossom. We're going to get there, I promise. Next step up is, this is me pushing the button. The next step is we have, remember the helmet I mentioned on top of the brain? This part right here? This is called the cerebral cortex, and the very front of it, you put your hand on your forehead just like she's doing. Were you doing that on purpose? She's scratching her neocortex, right? When you put your hand on your forehead, you now are touching the cover over your neocortex. It is the most sophisticated part of your brain, the exact opposite of the brain stem, which is the most primitive part of your brain. Sophisticated in the sense that it's the center of awareness. It's the center of problem solving, pattern recognition, all the things that make humans not only intelligent but aware. And awareness is one of the key to this. It's not just aware, I notice everything going on around me. It's also aware of me in my context. Adam and Eve standing in the garden, and all of a sudden they're like, I noticed I was naked. And I noticed, God is coming. All those things are the awareness of the neocortex functioning, just telling us about ourselves in the world that we're in. Living in the bottom half of our brain, we are very unaware of who we are and who we belong to. There's a lot of talk these days about the understanding what it means to be who we are in Christ. And until we understand that we can't know that from here down, we will talk about it but never experience it. But the experience of knowing who you are takes place only up here in the neocortex, where we really get to that place where we're out of primitive function, we're into highly sophisticated function, and we can not only know who we are, but we can know who we are in the one that we were created by, and in the one that we were redeemed by. The neocortex is the key to awareness, and therefore it's the key to identity. And I don't think there's, much more to say about that. Coordinates the whole brain, and sense of self and identity comes from the neocortex. I'm going to keep moving just because there's much more to say to get us to talk about trauma. And so I want to talk next about, going to the next slide, I think. Oh, no, I need to say something about one more piece on this. The last thing I want to tell you about your brain, and this is so important, every single thing that you do, you name it, you think of it, everything that you do in your life can come from either the top part of your brain or the bottom part of your brain. And here's why that matters so much. You know, there's a moment in the Old Testament where a couple different times God comes and he says to the Israelites, he says, look, I hate your feasts and your festivals. To which the Israelites are like, I thought those were your feasts and festivals. God says, no, I hate your feasts and your festivals because with your lips you do what you say, but your heart is far from me. We could just as accurately say, we serve him with the bottom half of our brain, but our limbic system is far from him. And what that means is you can do all of your religious activities, you can read the scriptures, you can pray, you can fast, and if you're doing it to prove to yourself how spiritual you are, or to show other people how spiritual you are, you're doing it from your midbrain and you're not getting any benefit from it. You want to benefit from the practices of your faith. First of all, make the connections. First of all, get into the part of your brain where connection really happens. But when we're doing it out of fear, out of anxiety, out of the need to prove our value, out of the need to prove our competence, when we practice our faith out of all that need to prove something to the world, that's what God meant when he said, hey, you serve me with the top of your brain, but the bottom half of your brain is far from me. Isn't it interesting that Isaiah 55 says, his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. His ways are higher than ours. As high as the heavens are above the earth, so are his thoughts and his ways higher than ours. What that could mean is that we spend too much time living in survival and not enough time living in creation and aliveness. Because 1 Corinthians 2 says we do have the mind of Christ, which means it's possible for us to get into that place where we not only know but practice the spiritual mind within. But it's not below the line, it's above the line. Now we got to get to the nervous system. Click. I will never know whether it's me or you, Lauren, but thank you so much for making it feel like it's me. Now you see this, I told you the art of this PowerPoint was going to be stunning. Try not to gasp when you see this lovely picture of your nervous system. That's what that is, by the way. So you see the brain and its four quadrants on top of this nervous system. Below that is my terrible rendering of all the nerves that go from your brainstem into your spinal column and into all the extremities of your body. That's a really terrible rendering of that. But just pretend those lines go to every finger point, every toe, every extremity of your body. That's your nervous system. And what happens is there's this communication between your brain and your nervous system that's trying to confirm what is real. Remember what I said, your nervous system is the way that you experience yourself in this world. And the brain and the nervous system have this kind of cyclical conversation with each other that says, hey, this is real, that's not. What's going on? That's somebody else's issue, that's not yours. What's going, this thing that's happening. But here's what happens. When we're living from our brainstem, see if I did this right. When we're living from our brainstem, the brainstem sends its message down to the nervous system, and the nervous system says, sure enough, that's what we're experiencing too. And what we do when we do that is we live where our brainstem was formed, which is yesterday and the day before and the day before and the day before. And what that means is when the brainstem is talking to the nervous system talking to the brainstem, we are living our history and cannot be present in this moment. Your body may be present in this moment, but your nervous system has taken you back to the past somewhere. And sometimes it's living the past over and over and over and over again. Because one of the ways the nervous system functions is like a tape recorder. Wow, did I just date myself? Remember tape recorders? You push the button, click, and the cassette rolls and it records something. The nervous system functions as a recording device so that everything that's happening to me gets recorded. And when the brainstem communicates to the nervous system, it says, remember, 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 remember. And what's happening is the nervous system says, yeah, the past, yeah, the past. And you're living every day again like it's Groundhog Day. Every day you wake up and Sonny and Cher are on the radio, they say our love don't pay the rent. And the same day happens over and over again. You may put on a different shirt, you may change your underwear, but you're living the same pattern over and over again because your brainstem is only about survival. It can't give you abundant life. So if we are going to get out of that, we've got to learn how to get to the upper part of our brain. When the upper part of our brain now talks to our heart. I push the button, the heart pops up. I tried not to push the button and the heart didn't pop up. The top of our brain talks to our heart, and the heart talks back to the top of our brain. See, when I go, it works. The heart talks back to the top of our brain, and now we are living from the place that Scripture tells us is where all of the issues of our life flow from. That the aliveness that comes not from the mind, but from the heart, taps into the upper part of our brain, which sends messages to our heart, and the heart says, yes, that's who you are. That's what's true. That's the kind of truth that can make you free. And when the upper part of your brain sends life to your heart and your heart sends life to the upper part of your brain, we begin the process of renewing the mind. And when we renew the mind, we're transformed. I'm going to make this part really quick, but it's important. One of the things we've got to understand about the function of the human soul and its created design is that when God created the first human being, he picked up a ball of dirt from the ground and breathed the breath of life into Adam's nostrils, and he became a living being. So the design of the human soul is that we live by receive, contain, and broadcast the person and breath of God. We cannot do that in survival brain. We can only do that when the top of our brain connects to our heart and the heart connects to the top of our brain. Literally, science says that the brain sends electrical signals outward and the heart has a magnetic signal coming inward. And so we receive, contain, and broadcast. And when those two parts sync together and work together, we are functioning out of the spiritual side of our being. We are no longer functioning out of the past, which is what the first slide or the first part of the slide said. Rather, we're functioning out of the present and the future that we're capable of creating when we're not living in survival brain. Trying to make that go away. Trauma. That's a lot of foundation just to get you to this slide. Bob, you're going to talk about trauma, right? Yes. Ready? You guys ready? You feel like you know your brain better now? You guys feel like you're in the upper part of your brain? You feel like you all took a deep breath, connected to yourself? If I'm going too fast, you slow down. I'll slow down too. One of the things you want to know about those 4 levels of your brain is you can help somebody else, depending on what part of your brain you're in. You put a draw on somebody else to go to that part of their brain. So if I'm going too fast up here, and I'm telling you all about how you can slow down and really be in the bottom part, or the upper part of your brain, it's very unlikely I'm going to produce that by me going too fast. But if I can slow down, and I could get to my limbic system through connection, make a little bit of eye contact around the room, you can feel that what happens in that is we all have a better chance of getting into our own upper part of our brain. Trauma is, remember what I said a couple minutes ago, the nervous system can be a tape recording of the past, which, yes, I am 62. I know CDs and digital recording is the world we live in. I still have a cassette player somewhere in my house. Trauma is an injury to the nervous system. When the nervous system is somehow impacted or imprinted in such a way that after the event or period of time the nervous system is changed, you experience trauma. Trauma can happen from an outward circumstance, it can happen from an injury, it can happen from an observation. Anything that we experience or observe in our immediate circle, sometimes people even get traumatized by the news. Now, it's probably important to talk about this for a second. Is this all right, boss? This is important. There's research now that says that when it came to the Boston Marathon bomber, people who watched 90 minutes a day of coverage of that bomber were actually traumatized more than the people who were present the day the bomb went off. Turn off the news. Did I just say that out loud? You can be traumatized by a constant diet of traumatizing images and information. So trauma is when your nervous system is injured in the same way that if someone hits your arm and it bruises, there's an injury under the skin, and that's why the blood comes to the surface. There's an injury there, and the nervous system can be impacted in the same way. And the way you know that is something changes, and I'm going to use the word permanently, but that's the wrong word. Something changes permanently, but it's not permanent because it can be changed, and we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. Something changes in such a way that you walk away from that moment or walk away from that experience or away from that period of your life, and your nervous system is functionally different. It's recorded some things in such a way that that tape recording can play again in your experience. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So trauma is an injury to your nervous system. It's also, thank you, an experience that makes a change in the functioning of your nervous system. It doesn't have to be just specifically a physical trauma. It can be you witnessed something. I have a friend of mine who watched a motorcycle go off an overpass, and he pulled over to try to help and looked over the overpass, and the rider of the motorcycle was kind of laying on the ground in a position the human body shouldn't be in. And he said, for 6 months, I couldn't get that picture out of my brain. He was traumatized. It made an imprint on his nervous system and on his brain, and those thoughts would just interfere all day long. It would just kind of flood his brain with the picture of that guy laying on the concrete. It was the clicker this time. It's also a state that is recorded by the nervous system and can later be recalled or replayed. This is the part I'm saying. How many of you saw the movie American Sniper? American Sniper is a story about an American who was in Iraq and did, I think, 6 or 7 tours of duty. And they showed a couple different times he's in Iraq, and they showed a couple different times he's in the U.S. with his family. There's a brilliant scene somewhere in the middle of the movie where they show the back of his television. He's sitting on the couch, and you hear bombs going off and guns shooting and men screaming and just all this chaos. And as the camera slowly pans around, you get to this point where he's laying on his couch and you expect to see war scenes on the TV. The TV's not even on. See, when we're traumatized, the nervous system hits the record button, and the state that you're in that moment is recorded in your nervous system, and when the right or wrong event or triggering thing comes up, your body floods with the experience of what the trauma was, and even though you're not in the trauma, your body and your nervous system are experiencing it as if you are. Just like Chris Kyle looking at that television with the screen off, he is mentally, emotionally, and the physiology of his body is as if he's in combat and could die at any moment. It's the ultimate fight, flight, freeze. And the difficulty is his trauma may be different from yours, but it doesn't function different from yours. See, the dilemma, we tend to think, oh, they've got bad trauma, I have a little bit of trauma. And well, there are degrees of maybe what that injury is. Trauma is trauma is trauma. And the nervous system records because that's what it does. By the way, your nervous system records positive things, right, Judy? So how many times have you lived through spring? You don't have to tell. Spring, the season. 78 times. 78 times through spring. You know what spring feels like, don't you? And the first time in the winter that the sun comes out and it's not chilly, doesn't your body start to go, oh, here it comes? Your nervous system has recorded spring, just like it's recorded chocolate cake, just like it's recorded falling in love, just like it's recorded every experience. And so when we're traumatized, it records a painful experience, and with the right button that we call a trigger, a sound, an event, a word, anything at all that triggers that recording in the nervous system, the body turns on that recording. It's like, I might as well be in combat. I might as well be in the car accident. I might as well be looking down over the overpass at that guy's body on the ground because all of my senses are activated as if that's what's happening right now. And now you see why I call this the hidden pandemic, because to some degree, more people in this room experience trauma and carry trauma with them than don't. And you may not have thought of that. You may not have thought about yourself in that way. But if you have anything in your memory that interferes with your present day, and it takes over your nervous system, takes over your thoughts, or takes over your emotional state, that's trauma playing record, and you're experiencing it today. Because the nervous system does what it does, and it does it well, trauma is when your nervous system gets that recording, and all it takes is the right or the wrong experience, moment, or trigger to go, hey, remember the motorcycle? Remember when the dog bit you? Remember when your husband left you? Remember, 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 and the nervous system goes, and you don't just remember it, you remember it. And here's the tricky part. This is where the illogical behavior comes in. Sometimes you don't just remember the feeling of it. Sometimes you remember the behaviors of it, and the nervous system says, hey, remember, there's relief if you'll do that thing over there. And so a grown-up person will go abuse themselves again, or a grown-up person will go out in the streets and buy street drugs, or a grown-up person who's been really walking in freedom will suddenly go back and return to their habit. And it's not because they're bad. It's because their nervous system is going, hey, you know how to get some dopamine, right? Why do you think they call it dope? You can get some dopamine if you'll just do what your brain expects you to. And your brain expects you to repeat that pattern. And trauma pulls that pattern up and says, your nervous system's on fire. You want some relief? And every one of us has a different way that we believe relief will come. I probably had 3 or 4 different men in my practice over the last 15 years. They come in, and their wives are going crazy because their husband keeps confessing dumb little things to them. Honey, I let the dog out today. I'm so sorry. It's okay. But they keep confessing things as if they're confessing some terrible sin. And in most cases, that man at one point confessed to something that really was terrible. His wife forgave him, and the relief that he felt, he's trying to feel it again. And he's trying to feel it again. And he's trying to feel it again. And so he's bringing the recording of the original trauma, his violation of his vows, he's bringing that in his nervous system and saying, hey, can you call my nervous system again? Just say, I forgive you again. And she's going, I don't need to forgive you for the dog getting out. He's going, my nervous system is on fire. Help me. Trauma takes over our lives, takes over our senses. And what I want you to understand is it doesn't just take over our thoughts and our feelings, it takes over our behavior. To understand this, I realize this next slide might be a little political feeling, but I promise I've been using this illustration for a while. What I want to do is I want to teach you about trauma by talking about the self-driving Tesla. You guys all right? Anyone's nervous system catch on fire when I put that up there? I apologize, but I promise I've been using this illustration for the last 5 years, not just tonight. What I want to do is I want to talk about, in particular, the self-driving Tesla. And so in case the picture itself is problematic, I want you to take a look at my beautiful rendering. I told you it's lovely, right? My beautiful rendering of the self-driving vehicle. And the reason I want you to see this is because this is exactly what's happening inside our body all the time. Think about this for a second. How many of you guys at least play some kind of a sport where if I threw a ball, you would likely catch it? Most of you? Or, a Frisbee or something. Think about this for a second. What's involved cognitively, neurologically, and practically, muscularly in this process of literally just catching a ball? The senses have to see that ball, approximate its speed, approximate its arc, kind of recognize at what point it's going to reach. We've got to reach the hand up, close the hand just in time, and all those things are our nervous system running a very quick program that says catch. And it happens so fast, we don't think about it. You've got the senses involved, you've got the brain involved, and then the nervous system fires the body to raise your hand and catch the ball. Same thing happens with this self-driving car, which could be any brand. I mean, it could be a Chevy for all I know. But the self-driving car has a couple different things. Number one, it's got, click, sensors and cameras all around. This is the equivalent of your eyes, your ears, your touch, your smell, and your taste. I got 5, right? There's 5 senses. The sensors and cameras around the perimeter of a self-driving car are constantly monitoring the horizon, just like your senses are constantly monitoring the horizon. So when something shows up on the horizon, click. Oh, that's a computer. The self-driving car also is a computer. Just like you have an amazing brain with all 4 levels, self-driving car is a computer. And those sensors and cameras will send messages to the computer, and the computer and the sensors are constantly scanning, just like your eyes and ears are. So when something gets in front of this self-driving car, I know, don't be distracted by the PowerPoint. I promise there's a really helpful point to this. When something's in the way, a signal is sent to the scanner sends a signal to the computer, and the computer sends a signal to the turning or stopping devices. And it all happens in a split second. It seems like one event, but it's 3 events that take place. Your nervous system functions the same way. Your system or your senses are scanning the horizon. Your brain is getting signals and your nervous system is responding. And most of the time, you're not thinking about it. You ever, something startle you and you jump like that? You didn't think about jumping. That's your brainstem going, oh, wait. And so it's something in your senses. Your brain sends a message. The message sends something to your muscles, and your body responds. That's how it's supposed to work. And so one of the things I want you to understand is that trauma is actually your body doing what it's supposed to do in harmful circumstances. And what I mean by that is, imagine for a moment, this self-driving car drives through a swarm of locusts. I know that's a grasshopper, but let's pretend. It drives through a swarm of grasshoppers because it is after fall in Texas at some point. And as you drive through that swarm of grasshoppers, the cameras and the sensors all get bug guts all over them. I know, it's gross. But what's happened is that self-driving car just got traumatized. And what that means is its nervous system is going to function exactly the way it's designed to, but the signal that it's sending is distorted because the sensors are distorted. And when the bug guts all over the sensors and the cameras send a message to the brain goes, oh no, it brings the car to a screeching halt, and it won't move at all because it looks like there's something on all four sides of the vehicle. And now it's frozen and can't move when it's in the middle of no obstructions at all. And it looks perfectly illogical. But based on the input of the senses and the processing of all those, the signal to the brain and the brain signal to the body, it's perfectly logical based on the signals being sent. So when we understand that your nervous system is doing its job perfectly, but something has been injured, something's been imprinted on your nervous system, all of a sudden, hopefully, two things can happen. Number one, we can have a lot more grace for ourselves in the places we struggle. And number two, maybe we can let go of some shame and stop thinking that maybe we're terrible, terrible people and start realizing that our nervous system is doing exactly what it was designed to do, but somebody came and did some damage to it. And now what we've got to do is figure out what do we do about the damage to our nervous system so that we can get back out of these conditions. I'm going to talk just quickly about these two things, very quickly, because I want to get to what we can do and leave some time for Q&A. As I said I would, I forget how fast time goes, Blossom. PTSD, which I'm sure at this point in time, it's culturally understood. Most of you know PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. And what that means is that people experience these intrusive memories or thoughts, they avoid, just like that car that's got bug guts all over it, they're avoiding more contact with the world. They have negative changes in mood or thought process, hyper-arousal or reactivity. Oh no, there's bug guts on my sensors. And, CPTSD. Those are some symptoms of PTSD. But these days, I think it's also important to understand there's a relatively new diagnosis called complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And complex post-traumatic stress disorder is almost always related to what I'd call psychological or emotional abuse as opposed to like an event like combat or a car accident or a natural disaster. And complex PTSD has a slightly different set of symptoms, but it's important to notice because, again, if trauma is the hidden pandemic, CPTSD is hidden even more. Because what happens with CPTSD, because it's psychological abuse or emotional abuse, that's a whole nother evening's worth of teaching, but when people suffered psychological or emotional abuse, complex PTSD, I can say it colloquially like this. When an accident happens, a natural disaster happens, I'm in combat, something becomes what does the damage to me, and if something does damage to me, at least I know that. But when there's been emotional or psychological abuse, here's what happens. The nature of emotional and psychological abuse makes me become my own abuser. And at the root of all sexual abuse and physical abuse is psychological abuse. Again, we won't take much time to talk about that, but fundamentally, psychological abuse is when the abuser makes the abuse victim responsible for the abuser's problems. Could go much, much deeper than that, but we don't have time tonight. And what that ends up doing is the abuse victim then starts thinking, I'm the wrong one. I'm the bad one. I'm the abuser. And by the way, if you're asking yourself the question, am I the abuser? Odds are very good that you're not. But CPTSD is what happens to people when they've been involved in narcissistic abuse, psychological abuse, emotional abuse. And like I said, all physical and sexual abuse have the underpinning of emotional abuse. And so in that kind of abuse, we develop something called CPTSD, which is a little more complex, as you might realize by the word, and it's more increased emotional dysregulation, negative self-perception. I'm the one. I am the problem. Something's wrong with me, even when it's not. Number 3, difficulties in relationships. You can see why, because there's such an imbalance in the relationships where this happened. Hypervigilance or avoidance. Again, avoidance was part of PTSD, but it's also part of this. But hypervigilance is, are we going to be okay? Did I hurt your feelings? Or did I make you mad? Are you guys okay with me? Hypervigilance is constantly scanning the horizon to know if I've done something to make someone else upset with me or to make sure that I'm safe. Last one, flashbacks or other ways of re-experiencing the trauma. I think that's the last one. No, sense of helplessness or hopelessness. Trauma, then, once we understand the function of the brain and the nervous system, trauma is when circumstances or relational patterns impact the nervous system in such a way to leave what I use the word permanent, but what I need you to know is there's no such thing as permanent. When I say permanent, I mean you leave that situation with a change that has to get some help or it will stay that way. I didn't do it, but I was going to bring a wire hanger with me, not because of the movie with the wire hangers, but I was going to bend the hanger and say, your nervous system, when it's bent by trauma, I can talk to that wire hanger all day long and it's not going to straighten out. Trauma doesn't respond well to talk therapy. Now, there are certain elements of talk therapy, as you'll see in just a minute when I talk about what to do about this, certain elements of talk therapy that can be incredibly helpful, but talk therapy alone is almost never enough to give people what they need in response to trauma. Some of what they need, everybody in this room can give them, but let's take a look at what we know. There's more. Dissociation and physical symptoms. Wow, there's a long list. What do? It's important to understand that trauma comes from an experience, and one of the reasons why talk therapy doesn't do much for it is because it has to be undone by experience. If experience reprogrammed the nervous system, then experience is required to deprogram the nervous system. And so what kind of experience? Well, one of them would be EMDR. EMDR is a relatively new, even though it's about 25 years old, a relatively new model of therapy that specifically stimulates the nervous system bilaterally. And all that means is one side and then the other. And in stimulating the nervous system one side and then the other, under the guidance of someone who's trained how to bring memories into that process, it literally reprograms the nervous system in such a way that allows people to release what they've been holding on to. In other words, the recording they've been holding their nervous system, you can begin to erase that recording a little bit at a time. See, I'm still dating myself with the tape recorder in front of me. But as we erase that tape recording, now a triggering event can come up and there's no longer a tape there. There's nothing to replay because the nervous system's been reprogrammed. EMDR is an incredibly helpful tool. I want to be clear. I'm trained to do this. I haven't gone much further than, I haven't been certified, but I have been trained to do this. It's an incredibly helpful tool, but it's important to understand a tool by itself doesn't fix things. I've got a lot of tools in a chest in my garage, but sitting there in the chest, they don't fix anything. The art of helping people is both a science and an art. And EMDR has a lot of science behind it. But if you're going to find help with somebody who knows EMDR, find an artist. Do you understand what I mean when I say that? Someone who just knows it but doesn't know people isn't going to be able to use that tool very effectively. If you go seeking counseling, we do a whole teaching on how to pick a counselor. Number one thing is, do you feel comfortable with them? Do you feel seen? Do you feel valued? Do you feel heard? And do you feel like they're going to care for you well? If you don't, it's legitimate to fire them and go find somebody you do feel that way about. It significantly increases the likelihood that if they've got tools in their chest, they're going to use the tools in their chest in a way that's effective for you. Number 2, by the way, I'm going to list 3 things that I do for people with trauma in my office. And the second one is I help them hear God. Listen, I can quote verses to them, but that's not the same thing. Remember, trauma comes from an experience. It needs to be undone by an experience. And I can tell them verses, that's not an experience. But when the God who spoke the world into existence, when the God from whose mouth came the land and the planets and the stars and the moons, when the God who by speaking created all things speaks to you, he's not just giving you information about what he wants you to know, he's recreating you. And so when we help people really come to learn, to recognize and hear the voice of God, what we're doing for them is we're reconnecting them to the thing that made them alive in the first place. to the voice that breathed the breath of life into them, that stayed in them and moved through them, and it renewed their mind. And so helping people really learn to discern and recognize and hear the voice of God, helping them learn how to interpret that and know what to do with that is often the most powerful thing that we do in our offices and can deeply affect the nervous program that's been programmed, or the nervous system that's been programmed by trauma. It can reprogram it by the same voice that programmed it perfectly the first time around. Helping people hear God is the second thing we do. Third thing is we do something called neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP. I won't take a lot of time to talk about that, but that's simply, if you think about it, when we communicate, most of our communication takes place in words. But somehow the symbols of those words connect with realities in our mind. So neuro-linguistic programming is simply it's a way of thinking about the human nervous system and mind, and it's also a way of thinking about it that gives us multiple ways to give the nervous system experiences. Again, there's a lot of people trained in that. Both Polly and I are trained in it, and a number of other people that are. And then the fourth thing I'm going to say about this is the last thing we can do. Did I really just say other? Nah, I know that what I wrote was other types of interventions that are physical, like there's lots of different forms of tapping, different kinds of exercises, different things that are, especially when done by trauma-informed teachers and facilitators, when we engage in physical movement in a number of different ways with someone who's trauma-informed, then what we begin to discover is sometimes that trauma is so trapped in our body, we have to let it out of our body. Let me stop here. Blossom, it's 7:47. Do you want to do questions and answers?
All right, who has a question? And I will need to use the microphone because we want folks to be able to hear, and those online would want to hear. Do we have a question?
I got a question. When you were talking about dopium, D-O-P-A, yeah.
I like that too. Dopamine.
Is that part of Parkinson's when the brain?
I honestly don't know. I think there is a connection, but I'm not wise enough to give you an accurate answer to that.
I was wondering about like the characteristics with someone who has that disease, because I know they take medicine for that drug, and I just wondered if you.
There's a number of different things. So one of the main drugs that they use to help people get off of hard drugs actually affects the dopamine receptors. So for every hormone that we release in the body, we have receptors that also allow them to kind of fulfill their purpose. Dopamine receptors, if our dopamine receptors aren't searching for dopamine, then we're not going to get it. And so what is naltrexone? Naltrexone is one of the drugs that they use to get people off of things like heroin and other kind of opiates. And it actually affects those dopamine receptors. And it does, I can't speak specifically to Parkinson's, but I know there's a number of physical conditions that can be helped by low doses of that naltrexone. Yeah. It's worth looking into, but I'm not the right person to ask about that. So.
Hi, I'm Jonathan. Actually, we're going to be going to yoga after the class tonight. How about yoga? How about just the movement and all the types of the ways that you can move your body with yoga that, most people are, I think, there's epidemic of not moving our bodies, right? We have an epidemic of not drinking enough water. We have an epidemic of not taking care of ourselves these days. So I'm just moving our bodies, quite put simply. The old days, you might be in the farm, you're moving your body, or you have to survive. Now, these days, nobody moves their body. So what do you know about yoga as far as being helpful for shaking up your body to eliminate some trauma?
Yeah, in fact, there is a real movement with trauma-informed yoga as one of the primary physical exercises to help people with trauma. Trauma-informed is kind of the label that people are looking for, because what we talked about tonight is a very 40,000-foot level. And so when you've got a helper, whether it be a therapist, a physician, or a yoga teacher who's trauma-informed, I worked with a client who also went to an accountant who was trauma-informed because they had financial abuse in their past. And their parents used money to control them. So they had issues with money that had nothing to do with money. It had everything to do with abuse from the parents. So back to your question, trauma-informed yoga, you can look that up and find people that do that. I'm a fan of it. I think anytime we find movement that both strengthens and moves our body in ways that are outside of what we normally do, we can release some things that the body's been carrying. And so specifically, if you're doing it for trauma, find someone who's a trauma-informed teacher. I also know, I actually started to say that a couple minutes ago when I was talking about the physical exercises. Some people have real superstition around yoga because of its origins in the East. And I would submit to you that physical exercise is physical exercise, and the only spiritual connection to physical exercise is the one that you make with your thoughts. So, great question.
And we have a question over here. I will just say, if you have kiddos in the nursery or children's ministry, please slip out and grab them and bring them back, and welcome to do that. And our next question.
Hey, I'm Kristen. So I actually wrote down a question to my mom here before you even said it, because I've been diagnosed with CPTSD, and I wrote down, then what's the difference between CPTSD and PTSD? And then you immediately answered the question. So then my actual question is...
Can I pause you for a second?
Of course.
There is a thing I forgot to say about the helping for that.
Okay.
And one of the most important things that all of us can do to help people with PTSD and especially CPTSD is empathy.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt.
Yeah, all I'm saying is it's important to recognize that when somebody has experienced that, just an empathic listening ear can be the first level of them getting help. So let me just say, I'm very sorry that you've experienced that.
Thank you. And I do believe that God puts people in our lives that can help us get through that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mom. So my question is, how does CPTSD connect with substance abuse when it comes to a genetic component with alcoholism and substance abuse? So there's a genetic component, but there's also abuse as it relates to that. With complex PTSD, how does it relate when the two are correlated?
Blossom, can I come back another Wednesday night or Tuesday night and just talk for hours about that? It's a great question. It's an important question, and it's a complex question. And the reason I say that is because there's not complete agreement on the genetic issue, partially because the relatively new science called epigenetics says that we can actually change our genetics. And because what happens is our genetics change relative to our environment. So you've got a fish that moves to colder water and its fins change because the water's colder. The environment changes the genetic makeup of that fish in such a way that its physiology changes. Same thing happens to us. When we move to a different environment, our genes actually change. And what that means is what the genetic science used to say was your genetics determine what's true about you. And now as they come to realize through the study of epigenetics, that's not necessarily true. Your genetics can be changed. And if they can be changed by the environment, listen very carefully. If my genetics can be changed by my environment, in between my environment and the actual genetic change, there's an understanding, there's a thought. And what that means is if I can get my thought in between the environment and my genes, I could actually change my genetic expression through thought.
So how do you go about that?
Say again?
How do you go about that?
That's why I say it's another Tuesday night? What's tonight? Wednesday? Wednesday. I would submit that there's a probably easier, catch me afterwards and we can talk about that a little bit, but what I would say is this. Almost always, any kind of addiction, alcohol, drugs, I always categorize addictions as either a substance, a behavior, or relational pattern. Every addiction, to some degree, is a counterfeit for something legitimate that people need. That's a massive oversimplification. But even somebody who has the genetic predisposition, even if the genes can be changed, even if they have that genetic predisposition, if they can find the real thing that they're counterfeiting, that's more powerful than changing their genes. That makes sense? So when we have either PTSD or CPTSD and we live in that constant state of anxiety, remember how I talked about dopamine is the thing that makes us finally feel normal. When people live in a state of PTSD or CPTSD, they never feel normal unless they can find a substance, behavior, or relational pattern that allows them for a few moments to feel normal. And so addictions and trauma are often tied together in a much more general way than just your question, and that is if I'm feeling anxiety all the time and I find something that will reduce it even for 15 minutes, I will go back to that again and again and again just to feel normal for 15 minutes. So compulsive sexual behavior, compulsive OCD kind of stuff, all that stuff has an emotional element to it so that if we're in a constant state of survival, that can drive the thought processes behind any compulsive behavior. So really good question, really hard to answer in a few moments, but I hope I at least gave you some big pieces. Catch me afterwards to talk about the changing of genetics. It's two too complex for this to just start here because, again, that's another. So.
And we've got a question over here. Go ahead. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lauren. I just wanted to kind of reiterate something up there is saying trauma comes from experience. It must be repaired with experience. What would you say to that of a civilian dating somebody who went to war, went to Afghanistan? Because I know you said empathy is one, but is there anything else you can kind of build off of that?
It's a great question, and thank you so much for asking it. I think when you're dating somebody who has trauma, it's important to recognize you're dating them, you're not their therapist. And so the best thing you can do as a dating partner or a marriage partner is to live with them in a kind, understanding, empathic way, but to really get into their trauma and dig into it and get some help with it, help them find someone who's a professional in that area. But what you can do relationally is, like I said, you can be empathic, and this is going to sound a little bit strange, but sometimes they often also need really, really firm boundaries. And all that means is in your empathy, don't become codependent. In your empathy, don't let them get away with things that are harmful to you or harmful to others. And so you can be empathic, but don't be sympathetic. I know that's a weird way to say that, but sympathy is just a principle of physics that says power is transferred between two systems when their frequencies match. And so if you're sympathetic, that means that their problem gets transferred to you. Empathy says, what's going on with you matters to me, and you matter to me, but I'm not going to carry it for you. I can't. And so the boundary is, I care about you, you matter to me, but you have to do the work. I can't do it for you. And if you're harmful in your traumatized behaviors or trauma repetition, if you're harming people in that, I'm not going to allow myself, I care about you enough to not let you harm me, because later you'll feel guilt and shame about that. Super important question, because I think a lot of times people in abusive relationships have moved from the empathy part to the part where they're trying to carry the weight of the other person, and that's actually harmful to both people. So empathy is, you matter to me, and I see you, and you're valuable, but I can't do the work for you. Does that help? Good.
Hi, I was just going to ask you, let's say someone is in a massive trigger, they're nonverbal, they're crying, they're overwhelmed. What are some of your best practices or tactics to help that person? And then what can they do on their own if they're alone?
Yeah, did someone tell you to ask that question? It's a question I should have answered without you asking. So Autumn, right? Autumn's question is, what do you do when somebody's triggered? And again, remember, triggered is somebody hit play on that memorized state of the nervous system. And what happens is they are literally transported to the past. So their nervous system is reliving a past event. So one of the most important things you can do to help somebody like that is reorient them to the present. Now that sounds so complicated, but it's not. You say, hey, what color is the carpet? Well, there's no carpet in here, Bob. Oh, really? Then what is it? Oh, it's wood. What color is it? Oh, it's brown. Now all of a sudden their senses are interacting with the present, and it pulls their nervous system back out. It's called grounding. And there are a number of different ways you can help people ground, but I think one of the most important ones is get their senses to engage. Any of their five senses, except don't get them to taste something. It's probably weird, right? But any of their five senses, eyes and ears are the easiest. Touch might be the third. But I often get people to look around my office when they're triggered and describe what they see. And when they describe something, I tell them to describe the colors and the textures. And I want them to go, then I have them listen carefully and tell me what they hear. So that's what I do with other people, is I just get them to engage their five senses in the present moment. And that sounds kind of strange, but it really helps them bring their nervous system back to the present if you get their senses back to the present. What do you do for yourself? At first, it's really difficult because you are the one who's been transported to the past. But as you learn, okay, that's me being triggered, okay, that's me being triggered, it's the exact same thing. Some people use like a fidget toy, and that's, again, using their touch, one of their five senses in the present. Some people will have maybe a couple words that they say to themselves. Sometimes it's literally, okay, I'm wearing a watch, I've got my blue, purple, whatever color the shirt is on. I know that it's probably not a primary color, but I call it blue. Anyway, and they use your senses, exact same thing, but self-guided. I also have, with a couple people who are highly traumatized and dissociate, I have specific moments in their life that they're really anchored to that are positive, And I'll have them pull up those moments or the places that are very positive for them. It's a different kind of grounding because you're not necessarily grounding them to the present, but you're grounding to them to the primary personality, not the dissociated part of them. Great question.
And we've got one more here, if you'd stand up.
Hi, I'm Alicia. Quick question. When you said in the complex PTSD, the emotional and psychological abuse makes me become my own abuser, can you clarify for me, please?
What was the second part of it? When I say in that kind
Makes me become my own abuser?
Yes. So it would be like this. I'm really stupid. It's my fault that that person keeps beating me up. And when you're still in the relationship, it's my fault that they keep drinking. So I must be bad because they're doing that. But if I were a good enough person, I could stop them from drinking. I could stop them from beating me. I could stop them from whatever it is they're doing to harm yourself or other people. And then when the relationship comes to an end, for whatever reason, you walk away from that going, I'm a really terrible person. I deserve to be punished. So you see people who had perhaps that alcoholic parent reproduce that in a marriage because they're used to that treatment. Their nervous system so asks for that. I know it sounds funny, and their mind doesn't ask for it. It's not conscious. But their nervous system says, this is what I'm familiar with. And so the midbrain says, get what your brain is telling you to do. And what your brain is telling you is, you're the bad person. You should be treated badly. So what do they call it? Trauma repetition. So you've been traumatized, but your nervous system memorizes it in such a way that you reproduce your own trauma just by the nervous system hitting play, because some of it's not just senses, but some of it's behavior. Is that a little more clear? All right. Great questions.
Okay. And we have one up here. And I think Sharon was asking if she could see the PTSD slide again, if we have that to bring up.
Do I have to do that, or can Lauren do that? Lauren's on it.
Yeah, my question's about trauma from a hailstorm. So I know that a lot of people have weather trauma, right?
You said from a hailstorm?
A hailstorm,
Yeah.
So because I was actually in my home at the time, and the hailstorm came and literally knocked out all the windows in the front of the house. I was there alone, and it sounded like, an airplane had fallen apart and fallen on the house. I mean, it was really, destroyed my car, a lot happened. I don't want to traumatize anybody here telling details.
Yeah.
But, because, all of us live here, so we could have gone through something like that. But, when you talk about, handling that, do you just wait for the next storm and deal with it, or because, it's going to happen, so just curious.
You don't have to be in the trauma situation for the healing to take place. So one of the things that we do with neurolinguistic programming is the mind has a way that it represents reality, right? So that reality is no longer present, right? But it's present in your mind. And so what happens is either another storm comes or just a crash in your house, whatever it may be, something triggers that, or you just know. Like my house flooded in 2002, and we lost 60 to 70% of our possessions in a flood that was only about 2 feet deep. And every rainstorm for the next 2 years, I get this sinking feeling in my guts. And so that's trauma. But what I'm after is your mind represents that to you in some way, and it's stored in here through the way that you represent it. Do you know how it does that? Like if you think about that right now, do you see a picture of that? Do you hear the sound?
And it's a feeling in my body.
Okay.
Yeah, so I try to. So it's definitely I'm getting out of it, right? So I'm healing from it because I face it. So when a hailstorm is quote unquote going to be coming or something is weather's coming, I don't hide from it. I'm smart about it. I don't get out in it, right?
Sure.
I know what the sky looks like now, right? So when it's coming, but to answer your question, what I think it is that it's in my body that I feel it.
All right. And when you feel that in your body, do you have a picture of that in your mind?
Yes.
And where is that picture in your mind? Is it out in front of you? Is it off to one side?
It's in front of me.
In front of you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how your brain represents that. It's the picture in front of you sends the signal to your body. So just try for a second moving that picture off to the left about 6 inches.
Okay.
And what changes?
The focus.
Okay, and anything change in your body?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really feel it right now.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. It's not as strong as it used to be.
Okay, yeah.
But my point is that I know I'm not, with living here, I know I'm not the only one that may experience trauma,
Right.
From weather, so.
So what I started to do with her is a little bit of neurolinguistic programming. The idea is that the mind represents all of our memories, just like the nervous system does. And if we can change the way the mind represents it, a lot of times we can change the way the body experiences it. So if we move that way over to the left, and the next time a storm comes up, you may or may not experience a difference. It'd be one of those things, if we sat down together, we'd kind of work with that till it changed. But that's, when I had the flood way back in 2002, all I did was just wait it out because it got a little less every 6 months, and I just waited it out. But I know now there's a lot more that I could have done. Find people who do EMDR, NLP, or hearing God. So.
And our last question, and then we'd love to just ask Bob, if we want to learn more about this or similar topics, what are ways that we can hear more from you or connect with your ministry and work? But did you have a question? This is our last one.
I kind of had just a comment. Thank you so much. It was very, very, very much needed. I needed to hear this. I'm glad that you were here tonight. One thing for me, I will say, is that when it's difficult to open up, right, to confide in people.
Sure.
And when you do, you need to feel heard. You need to feel, me personally, I don't want sympathy. I prefer empathy.
Yes.
Because if you sympathize with me, then it's almost as if you negate what happened in my life.
Right.
And I would rather you hear me, but then after you hear me, believe me. Because that's another thing that is that just because it seems so far-fetched, immediately someone will say, oh, something like that happened to me too. That shuts down somebody who needs to talk.
Right.
Because they may not really want you to solve the problem. They don't, really, they just need to be heard. They need to be believed. I think the biggest thing in trauma is not being believed.
Right. Especially in PTSD and especially in CPTSD, there's been a pattern of being not believed. And that's where the empathic listening, where people, I love what you said, not only listen, but believe. Because they've been so disbelieved by not only their abuser, but the people the abuser has manipulated, when you can listen to them and express belief in them, very curative to them, or very healing at least. Yeah, beautiful. Thanks.
And Bob, how can we follow you or learn more about this subject?
Real quick, one of the most helpful resources out there is a book called The Body Keeps the Score. It's kind of a well-known work these days, and just kind of the development of the understanding of trauma throughout history, and several things about even the development of EMDR. So the book, The Body Keeps the Score, is very helpful. Polly and I, my wife back there at the table, we have a website called Think Differently Academy, tdacad.com. You can pick up some stuff about that. You don't have to write that down. There's stuff on the table that's free. And so we've got a few resources on trauma. I'll just say this, we're being recorded still. Let's just say this.
Would you like us not to be?
Yeah, I would.